as yourself, you are doing right. But if you show favoritism, you sin, are convicted by the law as lawbreakers. The royal law is to love your neighbor as yourself. But once you start showing favoritism, you're not loving your neighbor as yourself. Therefore, you are being a lawbreaker. You're sinning against God when you show that favoritism. Now, it's true, some personalities and some people you're going to be closer to some people in the church than others. That's just human nature. But is our valuing of people going to be the same? Are we going to value relationships and try to build relationships with one another? Care for one another. When someone's suffering or struggling, are we going to help in that situation? And are we going to value people the same? Or are we going to judge people by the same standards that the world judges? One of the things that really bothered me, and I tested this because this passage really was on my mind at this workshop that I spoke at earlier last month, was we had some great speakers. I mean, we had some big name, well-educated speakers. We had Kerry Williams, we had Glenn Colley, we had James Maxwell, we had Brad Harris. Woo! Amazing! I mean, they had more degrees than a thermometer. They preached for 1,000 years, because they're all old. And they're amazing guys. But one of the things that I tested was, I was going to look at them and see, how are people going to treat them versus all the people who are actually attending the conference. And one of the things I noticed was I saw a lot of just people who showed up for the workshop standing around nervous. You know that nervous look where they're pretending to act busy, but they're actually scared and shy and they actually want people to come and approach them? I saw a lot of people like that. But at this workshop, I'd see Glenn Colley, I'd see Kerry Williams or Brad Harris, and there would be people literally in lines waiting for him, and then when they talked with him, they would fawn over him like they're a demigod and just be like, "Woo, can I have your autograph?" And it's just like, look at this. We're at a Christian workshop, and here, yes, these men are respected. I have some of their books. I even bought a DVD of one of the guys after the workshop. I mean, it's great. But what about that guy in the corner? What about that girl who's waiting for someone to talk with? That's why I think we need to start accepting one another. That's why it didn't really surprise me when I was talking with a group of preachers and the question was asked, well, what's the problem? One of them said, well, us accepting one another. It's because sometimes we bring in the standards of judgment that the world uses into the church, and that can't be the case. Once you come to Christ, you're my brother. End of story. Once you come to Christ, you're my sister. End of story. I accept you. And I value you just as much as anyone else. I value you as much as any other Christian brother or sister. And that's how we ought to be. I mean, one of the things I thought about was if every single Christian went up and responded the same way they did to these mega preachers to each other in the church, no one would feel unloved or disrespected. Running up to one another, talking about each other's accomplishments, encouraging one another, building one another up, thanking them for their work. If we did that, and we know we can do it because we do it to the people who we value, then everyone would feel loved and appreciated and respected. And that's how we need to be. This is one of the things that I look at and say, everyone ought to feel valued. Another aspect that I think about accepting is accepting by getting rid of worldly differences. Okay? This is kind of ledging on what I was just talking about. I mean, the world is very divisive by nature. We divide on nationality, we divide on race, we divide on politics, we divide on wealth, we divide on schools, we divide whatever it may be. Okay? But the nature of the church is unity, bringing it together. All these standards by which the world says, this is how you should divide amongst one another, we look at all those things and say, we don't care about any of that. You know? I mean, the world is always trying to divide, but Christ brings us together. Hey, Steve, are we unified, brother? Yes. Okay. The other week, he had the audacity to come and visit the other day, and he was saying that in his trailer park, he has this big flag of Oregon. You know? Yeah, the Ducks. Yeah, we don't like them. And a lot of people are threatening to burn down his flag, and he's like, well, I took it down because someone's going to burn down my house. And I told him, well, I wouldn't feel too bad about that. But I'm just kidding. But one of the things that I think about is, you know what? Even with sports, people kind of get aggressive. I mean, if we get so divisive on anything, it's like, you know what, in the church, we shouldn't care about anything. If Christ accepts them, they're family. And I think of this passage in Galatians 3, 26 to 29. It says, you are all sons of God through faith in Christ Jesus. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourselves with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, for all you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. Isn't that great? Because of faith and baptism in the one who came to redeem us, Jesus Christ, he has brought us all together, and all the worldly differences that divide us is something that Christ doesn't care about, and he brings us together, and we're unified, all one in Jesus Christ. We're heirs of the promise and Abraham's seed, and we belong to Christ. We belong to one another. Now, I don't know about your family life. I don't know how things were. But a lot of times people come to Christianity with no family and things like that. But once you get baptized into Christ, you have a family. You have a whole bunch of Christian brothers and sisters. You have a little Asian brother as a brother. You know, that's just how we work. Because of Christ. You know, I'm always so glad that there's so many differences. Because it really does prove God so loved the world. He loved the world so much that he has Joyce, who's ridiculously good looking, and then me, who's not so ridiculously good looking. That worldly difference didn't matter. Or I like the fact how some people have really beautiful black hair and some people have no hair. You know, that's one of the things that we look at. You know what, I just am amazed at how God can bring the most unique people together, and it works. Because we're one in Christ. So what's the application here? You see, we gotta accept one another by having a biblical treatment of one another. I mean, over the last few weeks, I've really emphasized some of the things and how we ought to respond to one another. You know, loving one another, encouraging one another, forgiving one another, all the different things. There's a lot of things that we know we ought to do for one another. But how can we really apply this? Because I keep thinking about that guy's statement who works at this bigger congregation. He says, you know, we're struggling with acceptance, and it's affecting our evangelism, it's affecting our fellowship, it's affecting our leadership training, it's affecting our Bible class teachers, it's affecting everything. Because that's the nature of division. But I kept thinking, what can we do now so that we establish a church culture here where we are biblical in the sense that we're accepting? And so as we grow, it won't be a problem. Because ultimately, we are doing what Paul says in Romans 15. Our purpose is to be one so that we can glorify God. So that he may be praised. And so one of the things that I looked at is, in the church, I want each and every one of us to make the commitment and the covenant to start valuing and accepting one another just as Christ has accepted us. We need to submit to the lordship of Christ and say, Christ, because you commanded this, and you know it's best for your church because it belongs to you, and because you know the deepest needs of my life and their life is for us to accept one another and love one another and to treat each other as Christ has treated us, then the best thing for all of us to do is to accept one another. Now we know we can't accept false doctrine and sin. I'm not talking about those things. Okay? Those are givens. But in regards to valuing and cherishing and serving one another, we need to start accepting one another. I mean, there's been too many people who have been hurt and have a hard time going to worship services. There's been too many times where people have left the church. There are too many times where people feel burnt out. And yes, sometimes it's because of the person who left or got offended or something. Sometimes people are easily offended, like the Bible teaches us not to be. Sometimes there's victimized thinking, and people will always be a victim and things like that. But regardless of some of those things, one of the things that we all should be able to do is stand before God and say, you know what? I did my best to accept your other children, to unify with your other children. Because you glorify God. Isn't it great when you see your kids and they're getting along and they're playing and having fun? But when they're fighting and arguing amongst one another, you're just like,